the applications or interactions of smart wheelchairs. So if you think of smart wheelchair, generally the first thing that comes to mind is, autonomously driving chair, something with sensors on it, maybe some lights and buttons, bells and whistles. But what does that actually mean when you're thinking about a person sitting in the chair?
Hello everyone and welcome back to the UX Academy podcast. Today I have a guest with me, my dear friend Patrick Carrington, who's a professor at Carnegie Mellon University and an all-around amazing person.
All right, so Patrick, you and I have known each other for years, but for those who are listening and don't know you, tell us who you are and what do you do?
All right, so I'm Patrick Carrington. I'm an assistant professor at Carnegie Mellon University in the Human-Computer Interaction Institute. I do work in the space of human-computer interaction and accessibility, primarily focused on ways to improve the quality of life for people with disabilities through technology broadly applied.
That's awesome. And how long have you been doing that?
So I actually thought about this just this morning. I've been working in the accessibility space and in HCI since about 2013. So that not quite a decade yet, but getting close.
Getting close. Yeah. 2013. That was that your first Chi? Was Chi Paris your first Chi?
Chi Paris was my second Chi. I went to my first Chi before I was actually doing research in this space. I was still deciding whether I wanted to stay in this space and figuring out what UX was all about, figuring out what HCI was all about. So that would have been Chi in Austin, Texas.
That's awesome. And how did you get into that? How did you get into the UX space and the HCI space in general?
So it really was introduced to it by my former professor, who happened to be a PhD student in an HCI research lab, who suggested that, because of the programming skills that I exhibited in the class, that maybe I'd be interested in doing some research. I started going to some lab meetings, found out that there was way more to this thing, and then was really intrigued by the idea of developing and designing intuitive and useful interfaces. Go figure. We could actually design those things from the beginning rather than fixing them at the end.
Yeah, that is so that's so cool, because that is essentially my origin story. And the PhD student who got me into this space, it was you. So this whole thing is your fault. I blame you for what's going on here.
I'll take the blame.
And do you have like an aha moment, like a specific moment when you thought, I was like, this is my calling, this is what I need to be doing for the rest of my life?
I'd probably say it was during kind of the first couple of big studies I did working on, research for people with motor impairments. So it was like over the course of a study, I wouldn't say it was really a moment, it was maybe a summer that kind of solidified it for me. I was, doing research on wheelchair selection, wheelchair design, and trying to understand how people choose different wheelchairs, what kinds of technology considerations they have for using different interactive devices. And I just got to do a bunch of different things to get acclimated to that space. So I was working both in the research lab. I was, reading research papers and, talking to other researchers in my area, talking to my advisor, talking to other PhD students. But I also got to do kind of an ethnographic type of study where I was working as a physical therapy assistant for the summer in a spinal cord injury clinic. And so there I got to actually work alongside clinicians, talking about how people get fitted for chairs, working on the rehab process, and alongside that, interacting directly with, would-be research participants, with patients in the clinic, people with spinal cord injuries, just living their everyday lives, and just talking about how technologies played a role in that, where technology could make a profound impact on people's lives, and just figuring out and working through those problems with all of these different people to kind of come up with what's one thing we could do? Not all of the things, but what's one thing we could do that could make change or make a difference now? And that just kind of carried over that idea of just being able to really connect these dots, work with different people to really put together solutions that could have, immediate and or lasting impact.
And speaking of impact, what do you think was the impact or the result of that work that you did in that summer? What came out of it?
So that summer is what really launched, the concrete output of that was my first research publication at the CHI conference, which was this Wearables and Chairables paper, where we started talking about some of the major considerations of what is it like to, of what technology should be designed like to account for people using wheelchairs in their everyday lives, more than just the kind of individual situations of, I'm interacting with my phone or I'm interacting to do this task. What is actually kind of the whole experience of using the chair, moving around, being on the move, interacting with devices, and going about your everyday life?
I really, really love the term chairable. I've told you many, many times how jealous I am that you get to work on something that is named so aptly. If you were to tell us, like in a sentence or two, just what is your definition of what chairable computing is?
Yeah, so for me, chairable computing is the space of computing that revolves around devices that are designed to fit a wheelchair form factor and take into consideration as many of the factors that are involved in that individual user's life, be it physical factors, functional factors, social factors, all of that kind of embodied in technology solutions.
That's really awesome. And do you have any sort of examples that you want to pull out from your body of work that you want to highlight that you think made the biggest impact in the state of the world as a result of charitable work?
So I think just the conceptualization is probably the thing that has actually had the most impact so far. Just the overall concept of chairables, that this idea of repurposing or re-leveraging or re-envisioning how we think about wheelchairs from it being purely a medical device to this potential computational platform, or this platform that allows us to build on top of to deliver, new experiences, new accessible experiences, whether it's interactive computing for devices or it's people actually interacting or doing the things that they want to do out in the world. And so one project that's kind of spun off of that and it's ongoing is this project called SpokeSense, where we're actually looking at chairables for wheelchair athletes. And so we're taking the overall concept of attaching things to the chair and applying that to this space of athletics and sports.
And is that sort of a purely academic pursuit, or do you have any industry partners or any industry experience that sort of touches on whether with this latest project or with Chairable in general?
So there's been a bit of both. Definitely for this project was SpokeSense. That actually kind of started out of my past experience working as a UX researcher at Intel, where we were looking at wearables for performance athletes and thinking about, how those wearables should be designed to fit those athletes' workflows and their needs for performance gains. And so I took that and had some folks that were really interested in that. Into the accessibility space, working with wheelchair basketball players. And so that's been, one avenue where there's been some connection with industry, but it has been mostly academic at this point. Obviously, working towards making more connections with industry on all these fronts. So all the folks working in the fitness domain, in the fitness sector, folks like companies like Apple, Amazon, Google, all of these folks who are actually working in this fitness space are interesting potential partners for this research.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love, nerding down and digging deep on academic stuff, but I wanted to pause a little bit and get your reflections and thoughts on your experience as a UX researcher and industry and how that's sort of contrasted with your regular life as an academic.
So I've probably been fortunate to work in, you hear a lot of stories about how there's a large difference between working in industry and working in academia. I haven't had I think I wouldn't say they definitely have been different, but I wouldn't say that they're completely different, right? Most of the pursuits that I've been engaged in have been kind of pathfinding projects, understanding need finding. And so actually the industry projects I worked on were mostly focused on, what are the things that we're going to do 2 and 3 years from now? What are the things we can do at this stage to get us set up for that? That being said, in academia, that's pretty much all of the projects are, we're working on something now, but the goal is to be setting something up strategically for, 2 years, 5 years, or thinking even 10 years or 20 years into the future as to where this technology could go, where these experiences could be. And so we're a little bit less constrained there. I've also worked on individual products for industry research. And I think that's probably where the biggest difference is, where you have, when you're working on a product, there's a much more strict timeline. There are more strict deliverables that you're trying to hit. You're trying to hit a product release. And so the choices you make are generally focused on how you can actually meet those deadlines rather than necessarily the largest picture possible. You're not necessarily looking at 5 years out. You're maybe looking at the impact of this product when we release it next year, or when we release it in 2 years. What's the impact of that going to be in 5 years? And what can we iterate on from that point? But there are, a bit of I would say timeline has probably been my biggest difference in those experiences.
And when you were working on the product-specific type of work, were you going after and doing research by looking at academic papers or talking to academic colleagues and things like that? And so this is sort of a two-part question. From your experience, how do you think we can amplify the academic work in industry, specifically, a tight deadline, product-driven industry work in UX?
So I would say that for the majority of the products that I've worked on, there's been varying degrees of interaction with the academic research space. In some cases, we looked at academic research for examples of, what is the leading edge in research, use of these technologies, or use of, cutting edge use of this technology advancement versus you kind of envisioning the user experience or envisioning what that future state should be. So really looking at kind of a speculative future based on the initial technologies, or saying, how does this product fit into, a larger vision of, interactive technology, or a larger vision of connected technology, or the smart home space. Because of that kind of relationship that the products that I was working on had to the academic research, I think more recently, some of the industry projects that I've been privileged to work with and work on have drawn a lot more closely to the academic research community, and have worked a lot more closely with academic researchers to really get to try not to reinvent the wheel on some of these deep social psychology problems. The market research doesn't always bring back the best in terms of user experience. You get what people want. If you ask people what they want, they'll tell you what they think they want. If you do really good qualitative research and understanding ethnographic studies, you find out what users need and how that fits better into their lifestyles, and you can actually make more well-informed decisions based on that user research. And that, I think, a lot of that work is happening in both places right now. I think there's actually a lot of replication of a lot of these studies, where in industry they're maybe more treated as competitive secrets or competitive advantage, where in academia the goal is to get this out there as much as possible. And so I see there's definitely been a shift in kind of the industry mindset and the academic mindset in terms of that collaboration. So I'm really excited about where things are headed. I haven't had as many opportunities, or at least not ones that are as public, that I can share on these fronts.
So you can't really share or talk about anything that that you might have been involved with. Do you have anything off the top of your mind, like an example of these collaborations that have resulted in really cool things out there?
So definitely as an observer of the academic research space and how that's kind of impacted products. I mean, some of the most recent things that have been released on, like Apple Watch, or the IoT space. So I'll give two examples. In the IoT space, one of them has been people building on research. I can't remember the specific researchers, but I can say Intel has a program of interacting with Intel Labs is kind of a research connected arm at Intel. And they really have they have a annual research symposium where they bring in academic researchers, and that research kind of informed some of the products that come out of that space. Some of the researchers that I've seen kind of get engaged with that platform have been, really inspired by some of the academic prototypes or some of the, envisioned scenarios of the future where, someone is living in a truly connected home. And then I've seen actually a couple of researchers at at Target, so like UX Target research, who actually built an entire smart home exhibit display to actually showcase all of that. And so they combine both elements of kind of the artistic demonstration with new product design in order to really kind of push this idea forward that connected experiences go beyond the smart thermostat, or they go beyond being able to lock your doors from your smartphone or things like that. And the other one is Apple, actually the Apple invention, both on sound detection and especially in accessibility domain. They've been actually publishing research in the academic domain, as well as kind of drawing on that and filling. And these things are starting to see these things kind of come out in product, like the sound detection framework, the hand washing feature, where the Apple Watch can automatically detect that you're washing your hands and start a timer, the countdown feature. I know the researcher who worked on that, and then so that was really awesome to see that work kind of become a product with a very useful application, in addition to all of the sound detection work that I think is developing in parallel. And so there's not really a lag. Often you see this kind of lag between, academic researcher may have looked at this problem maybe 5 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, and then it turns into a product, 3, 4, 5 years down the line, it's ready for production. But to see that happen kind of in real time within a year of learning about it in the academic space, it's a product. Advances in edge computing, I think, is probably the other biggest one. Cloud computing, I don't think there's really a distinction at this point between the academic production and the industry kind of pushing that forward to development. All the things you can do in the cloud versus what you had to do previously on individual workstations or setting up your pro setup at home.
What's the next thing that you're sort of working on that you're really excited about? What does the future hold for you that you can share with us?
So we've got a ton of things going. As relatively junior faculty, there's several, research threads happening right now. I think one thing that I'm really excited about, or two things I'm really excited about, are, continuing on the Chairable's work. We're really getting to a point, especially as things eased up from the pandemic, we're able to do, more hardware work. We're able to get more in touch with people, kind of get more of the face-to-face interactions going again. Right now, we're looking at the applications or interactions of smart wheelchairs. So if you think of smart wheelchair, generally the first thing that comes to mind is autonomously driving chair, something with sensors on it, maybe some lights and buttons, bells and whistles. But what does that actually mean when you're thinking about a person sitting in the chair? A lot of times our minds automatically go to the robotics of it. And in the assistive robotics, and rightly so, that stuff is really cool and it's really amazing. Oftentimes, the biggest shortcoming of that is you never actually see a person sitting in that chair. And so one of the things that we're doing right now is really looking at, when you put somebody in this situation, what are the kind of social scenarios that they encounter? What are the sensing needs that they have? What are the things that carry over from their not smart wheelchair, quote unquote, not smart wheelchair, that now change that experience, and how can we leverage that in a meaningful way out in the world? Rather than in the lab, we can do all kinds of cool stuff. But what does this actually mean out in the world for someone on the street, in the sidewalk? And how does that interact with the other infrastructure that's out there? Getting into kind of smart city domain, smart transportation. How does this intelligent wheelchair now interact with intelligent mobility devices on the sidewalk, like personal delivery robots, micromobility solutions, smart transportation? How do all these things kind of come together to create our big ubiquitous computing future?
It is a really bright future, and I can't wait to sit down with you back again in person, sharing some dimple pinch whiskey and talking about these things. And before I let you go, two things. What is your current favorite emoji?
Oh, my current favorite emoji. My second favorite emoji is the superhero emoji. But I'm really just enjoying the classic smiley face, big smile emoji, because I don't usually do that in real life.
The big smile emoji. Yeah. So you just send big smile emoji all the time. And could you tell the people where they can find you online?
I can be found in all the classic places. My website, patrickcarrington.com, Twitter at JustPac, JustPAC, JUSTPAC. It's often hard to distinguish that.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening. And if you enjoyed this podcast and you want to support it, please head over to studio89.design/store and pick up something for yourself. That would help us a lot.